My name's Bob Darrell, and I am an alcoholic. I was wondering who she was talking about. I'd like to welcome the newcomers. I'm real glad you're here. Next to me, you're the most important people in the room. Are there any members of Al-Anon here? Don't be ashamed. All right, that's enough. It's enough. Thank you. I'm a member of Al-Anon. I hate to admit that. Full step work with newcomers drove me as a whimpering newcomer into Al-Anon. And what I've discovered in Al-Anon is I discovered why so many alcoholics end up marrying Al-Anons. They finally find someone who thinks about them as much as they do. It's good to be here. I'd like to thank the committee, and I was shown an incredible amount of hospitality. Nancy, who gave me a ride over here, knew that I was nervous and I was a little self-consumed, so she almost got us in 3 or 4 accidents to take my mind off it. It's just a program of thinking about others. It's good to see my friend Howard here. I ran into him at a conference at Tri-State a couple years ago. And recently I ran into a guy up in Vegas that I guess knew him when he first got sober. Any of you people here know Howard Peaks. And I heard the story of how he took the second half of step 1 and how he really discovered his life was unmanageable. And the scenes that Howard was in a grocery store one day in the checkout line, and standing in front of him was a tall, very elegant lady with blonde hair and a long flowing white dress. And he stood there observing her. And wait a minute, I blew it. The story goes, this guy was telling me that when Howard took this step, he'd had 2 black eyes. And he asked him how he got the 2 black eyes, and he told him that he was in a grocery line at a checkout line in a grocery store, and in front of him was standing this lady with the long blonde hair and the flowing white dress. She looked very elegant. And Howard noticed that I don't know how to say this delicately. Her dress was in the back, was kind of caught up in her crack. And Howard noticed that and decided that it was awful embarrassing that a woman like that, with that elegant lady, should have that going on. So he reached over and she turned around and right in the eye. And his friend said to him, well, that explains one eye. How'd you get the other black eye? And he said, well, she was so agitated that I pulled it out. I thought she must have liked it there, so I put it back in. I'm not really a comedian. I'll just go to any lengths to keep from telling you the truth about me. And I guess I had to tell you I used to drink. Most of you probably guessed that. You'll see very few speakers in Alcoholics Anonymous that have never had a drink. Once in a while, a chronic Al-Anon will sneak up here in disguise, but most of the time we've drank. And I don't know if from what I've learned of this disease, especially what I've learned in reading the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, I've come to believe that I was always an alcoholic. And I believe that because of some of the things it tells me in the book. And it says that we are bodily and mentally different from our fellows. And I believe I was always a little mentally different from other people. Growing up, it seemed like there was nobody in my family or in my neighborhood or in school that looked the way I felt. Everybody seemed to just kind of be doing fine, and they were just happy. And I always had a gnawing emptiness, a feeling of dis-ease, a feeling of restlessness inside of me, and basically a feeling like I didn't quite fit. And I did a lot of things before I ever took my first drink to try to treat that. And I could sum up my whole life story and just by saying that I've spent my whole life trying to treat a disease that for most of my life I didn't even know I had. And when I was a kid in school, I tried to be a little smarter, a little tougher, a little louder, a little more daring than the other kids, just to try to feel even. It wasn't enough just to be me. And one of the things that's always been true, and I've always kind of sensed somewhere inside me where I really live, is that I've never really done enough. And, I don't know about normal people. I wonder about normal people sometimes. They just kind of, I got a guy that works for me who's a normal. And he's the kind of guy that he could get a phone call that his house burnt down, his wife left him, and he's bankrupt, and he'd just go, well, it's just the way it is. Now, I've never seen an alcoholic been able to do that. We have an ability to fight every inch of the way, no matter what happens to her. And I was always that way. And I always seemed to feel like I was coming from behind, like I was never quite good enough. And yet there were periods in my life where, being driven by that, I excelled in things. I did things that probably put me at the top of the class or put me in positions where I got a lot of notoriety, and it didn't seem to matter. I always felt like I wasn't good enough, like I was coming from behind. And there's another aspect of this disease that if I didn't have it, I wouldn't be here tonight, and that's the physical allergy. The fact that I am bodily different than other people. Something happens to me every time I take a drink of alcohol that doesn't happen to normal people. And years ago, I lived with a gal who was a normal drinker. And she was the kind of person that could go out to a bar and have a drink and maybe have another one and leave half of it on the bar. And occasionally she'd say things like, no, thank you, I don't want any more, I'm starting to feel it. All right? Now, I think I was more baffled at the way she drank than she was at the way I drank. For a person that had this physical allergy, it's impossible to say, no, thank you, I don't want any more, I'm starting to feel it. For me, that would be like having sex and having 3 or 4 strokes and saying, no, I've had enough, I'm starting to feel it. Right? And I have a theory. I think we're the ones that really drink right. Right? They don't know how to get off. All right? And I hear people in Alcoholics Anonymous say they wish they were a social drinker. I would never want to be a social drinker. It just would never occur to me to have 2 drinks. if science came out with a pill that made an alcoholic into a normal drinker, it would occur to me that if one pill could do that, that probably 30 or 40 of them would make me a very social drinker. And I took my first drink when I was about 12 years old. I was hanging around with a bunch of guys that were older than I was, and we were the juvenile delinquents of the neighborhood. And I was trying to fit. And I desperately, desperately wanted to fit somewhere. And the reason I wanted to fit with these guys is that they looked cool. They looked like nothing bothered them. And with me, I always felt like everything bothered me. I felt overly sensitive all the time. And these guys just seemed to have an ability just to walk through life and nothing bothered them. And I was hanging around with these guys, and I was trying to act tough and swear and smoke cigarettes and shoplift and doing all the things to fit with them, hoping against hope that if I did what they did, I'd feel like they looked. And one day, and I was a losing battle. And those of you who have tried that, you know that nothing really changed. You do all the outside stuff and nothing really changes in here. And one day we stole a bunch of whiskey out of somebody's house. And we're standing around, and I have no idea what happened to those other people when they drank. But I'll tell you something, there was something happened to me that changed my life. I went from feeling like I wasn't good enough, like I didn't fit, to being less than, to have that emptiness, that sense of urgency that I always walk with, that feeling of not being enough. And within one or two drinks, all of a sudden I felt as good as any of those other guys. And I found the thing I always looked for. I found something that would make me feel like you look. And, you know, if you felt the way about yourself and about life the way I felt about myself and I felt about life, it's no wonder that I spent the next many years of my life obsessed with alcohol. It was the most important thing in my life. No matter what I told you, I could tell an employer that the job was important. I could tell a gal that the relationship was important. But if you watched my feet, if you watched how I acted, nothing was more important than drinking. Because when it came down to it, I was not gonna give up alcohol for anything. And I had no idea that I was an alcoholic. Every drink I ever took, I drank to get drunk. And yet, for a lot of years, I never realized that. I kind of thought it was my idea. I thought I drank that way because that's the way I want to drink. That's just the way I am. I never thought that, it never occurred to me that I was driven by a physical allergy that compelled me to drink until I passed out, once I ingested an ounce of alcohol. Never occurred to me. And by the time it occurred to me that might be true, it was too late to do anything about it. And, you know, I ran across a story in a magazine, in a book, actually, a couple years ago. And it was, when I read this, it brought tears to my eyes because I saw myself so well. And the story was about a bunch of scientists who were doing experiments with laboratory rats. And what they were doing is that they had these rats, and they performed operations on them, and they implanted these tiny little electrodes into their pleasure centers in their brain. And these electrodes would stimulate a very, very mild electrical charge, which just kind of threw them into euphoria. And they put a pedal in this cage, and every time one of those rats would press that pedal, it would get that charge and go into euphoria. And what happened was that those rats would sit at that pedal with the exclusion of sex, food, sleeping, until they would pass out from exhaustion, come to, start pressing that pedal again until they eventually died. And another thing that they discovered, if they clipped the wires and left the pedal in there, and the rats would go over there and press the pedal, and they weren't getting any effect, they would keep pressing the pedal until they finally sunk in that the party was over, and they would go over in the corner of their cage, curl up in a ball, and just lay there until they died. And they didn't want to eat anymore, and they didn't want sex, and they didn't want anything. And when I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, I kind of felt like one of those rats who my wires had been clipped. And there was a uselessness inside of me. There was an emptiness and a feeling like there's nothing to live for. Because what had happened to me is that I drank over the years to a point where alcohol stopped doing the magic for me and just started doing things to me. And you hear it 1,000 times in Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. People talk about finally it stopped working. And I understand what they mean. And it's not that when I drank alcohol I didn't get drunk. It's that the last couple years of my drinking, I would be sober and I would start out another run because I couldn't stand sobriety anymore. And I would start out the run wanting to have a couple drinks and get that feeling back, like everything is okay. And wanting to have a couple drinks and being able to go and talk to people and become external. When alcohol worked for me, it was a magic thing. I remember one time I was working in a factory back east at a job I hated with people I couldn't stand. And there was nothing about it I liked, and I would just work on that job and watch that clock and just wait. And wait until the buzzer went off and I could get out of there so I could go across the street to the bar and have a couple drinks. And I would walk in that bar many times so isolated and so uptight and locked inside myself in that prison that people like us that suffer from this disease of self-centeredness live in for a lot of years. And I'd walk into that bar like that, and I would have a couple double shots, and all of a sudden the door would open, and I would come out of myself, and I could talk to the people at the bar, and I could fit. And after a few more drinks, that 75-year-old lady down at the end of the bar started looking real good, and that's magic. That's magic. But at the end of my drinking, I'd go into a bar, or I'd get a bottle of wine or wherever, and I would drink, and I would still be locked inside myself. I'd be the guy you saw at the end of the bar all by himself, drinking all alone. And alcohol didn't work anymore. And a lot of things happened to me when I was drinking. I went to jail a lot. I did a lot of embarrassing, humiliating things. But none of those things brought me to Alcoholics Anonymous. What brought me here and how I hit a bottom was the demoralization of finding out that I had no way out anymore. No way out of me. See, alcohol did something for me that I desperately need. I've always needed all my life. It would enable me to get out of myself and become external. It was, for a lot of years, it was a cure for self-centeredness. And then when it stopped working, I was like a prisoner inside myself. And the last couple of years of my drinking were hell. I was all alone. I was living on the streets. I couldn't work anymore. I was just hustling, getting enough money together to buy another bottle of Mad Dog or Wild Irish Rose, and just trying to I was doing time. And I was out in the open and I was doing time. And I started getting exposed to Alcoholics Anonymous as a result of in institutions, in county jails, and in drying outhouses up and down the East Coast. And if you're here and you're new and you don't feel like you fit here, that's the indication that you really do. If you come here and you feel like you fit here and you feel like this is it, that not drinking is what you've been looking for all your life, you're probably an Al-Anon. I believe that the difference between a problem drinker and an alcoholic, and it talks about this in the book about how how most of us have known people who with a sufficient reason could just swear off and never take another drink and just be happy. Now, every time I quit drinking, I started running into the real disease of alcoholism. And I never experienced it until I quit drinking. And then all of a sudden, I feel that feeling in spades that I don't fit. That feeling of restless. I like the way Dr. Silkworth explains it in the doctor's opinion. He says the alcoholic being dry is restless, irritable, and discontented, unless he can again experience the ease and comfort he once found in taking a few drinks. And every time I stopped drinking, I felt like a fish out of water. I felt like no matter where I was, I knew I really should be somewhere else. And no matter what was going on, it wasn't good enough. And I had this feeling that even though nothing's wrong, nothing's right either. And I don't know about anybody else, but I'm a wimp. I can only stand so much emptiness, so much restlessness, so much uneasiness, and eventually all kinds of things that are insane start looking like good ideas, just for a change. And the insanity of this disease is that there were times when I took a drink. I'd be sober for a while, and I took a drink, and I had everything to lose. I was on probation. They were going to put me in jail. Was staying in a halfway house, and there's snow on the ground with no place to live. And if I take a drink, I'm out in the streets. I might go to jail. And yet, the insanity of this disease is at times an hour or two of relief in exchange for 6 months, maybe a year, or forever of misery seemed like a good, fair deal to me. Right? And, at those times it didn't, they tell you around here, think to drink through. Well, I'm one who has thought to drink through and drank anyway. And I've come to believe that unless I made a connection with a power greater than myself, I was screwed. And, the problem with that is, thank you, I came here a militant atheist. When I was raised a Catholic, and that's a whole separate recovery story in itself. I don't say that to offend any Catholics. If you're a Catholic and it's working for you, that's great. If you're whatever you're working for you, it's great. I'm all for it. Just don't sprinkle me with nothing after the meeting. Anyway, I've always kind of I suspect that I've always had something a little wrong in here. And the reason is that I'm sure that what I heard as a kid in Catholic school is not what the other kids heard, or something. They wouldn't be Catholics anymore. They couldn't be. See, I heard about this God. Now this is why I suspect they probably didn't say this. But what I heard about a God that existed for one reason and one reason only, and that was to judge me. I heard about a God that had all these lists of rules that you had to follow, and even if you didn't know what was on the list and you did it, you were screwed, right? And not only can't you got to do certain things and you can't do certain things. The things that you can't do, if the thought just goes through your mind about doing it, it's the same thing. Now, I don't know about anybody else, but I've always been one of those people that the more I try not to think about something, the more I think about it. The nuns in school used to have this phrase. They'd say, you have to be pure of thought, word, and deed. In the minute they said the word pure, X-rated movies started going through my mind. And and I look around that classroom, and everybody else is just doing fine, right? And nobody else has this problem. And it's either one of two things. Either I'm from another planet, or there can't be a God. Because if there's a God, what's the use? I'm never going to measure up. I'm never going to be good enough. as a little kid, I used to try to think the right stuff. I remember when I found the wonderful world of masturbation, and I was racking up eons in purgatory, right? I would tell myself not to do that stuff, and I'm not going to think about that stuff. I'm not going to do that stuff, and I just do it more. It's kind of like when the last couple years of your drinking, when you swear off and you get drunk twice as much as you did before you swear off, right? And I just came to a conclusion as a young kid that there can't be a God, because if there's a God, I'm screwed. And there's a part in the big book. It says, deep down inside every man, woman, and child is the basic fundamental idea of God. And from that moment until finally making a connection through the program of Alcoholics Anonymous with a higher power, it seemed like I was always searching for something. And I was always trying to fill up something inside me that was vacant. And, by the time I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I would be made to come to these meetings, and I'd hear people talk about God, I'd get so angry. I felt like you were trying to sell me a religion. And I was in a recovery program one time, and they used to make us go to one Alcoholics Anonymous meeting a week, which I kind of thought was extreme. And I went up to the guy who ran the program, and I told him, I said, I don't think you can make us go to these meetings. I know you get some federal funds, and I know it says something in the Constitution somewhere about my religious freedom, and you can't make me go to those AA meetings. And he just looked at me with that look that they give you, around here, like you just messed yourself or something, and he says to me, he says, you're right. He says, you don't have to go to these meetings, but you don't have to stay here either. And there's about 3 feet of snow on the ground. So I can be flexible. I'll go to the meetings, but I'll show him I won't listen. And I did. And the first connection I ever made in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous is I was in a Skid Row mission on the north side of Pittsburgh, and they took me to their weekly outside Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. And there was it was a speaker meeting about like this, and there was a guy standing up at a podium just like I'm standing up here, and he was celebrating 10 years of sobriety. It was his birthday, and he was giving his pitch. And I had never seen anybody in Alcoholics Anonymous that looked like this guy. He had real long hair and a long beard. And see, I had real long hair and a real long beard. It seemed to me, at least from my distorted way of observing things back then, it looked like everybody in AA was kind of them. Like you were indistinguishable from members of the PTA. It's like you looked like you might have had a drink too many on the golf course, said something embarrassing to your boss, and came to AA for better business connections, right? None of you ever looked like, there was nobody in Alcoholics Anonymous that looked like they ever drank like I drank or ever felt like I felt. And this guy was standing up there, and he had long hair, and he had a beard, and I listened to him. And I listened to him for no other reason except that he looked like the kind of guy I might have drank with. And I heard him talk about some things that may have been said hundreds of times in meetings I was at. I don't know, but I didn't hear him. And I heard him talking about drinking until he passed out and going to the bathroom on himself. I heard him talking about the feeling of paranoia, like everybody was looking at him. He even made a joke about it. He said he had to stop going to football games because when the team got in the huddle, he knew they were talking about him. And I almost laughed, but being a newcomer, there's really nothing funny and about being sober. But I almost laughed. And after the meeting, I thought to I was under a lot of pressure from the guy who ran this place I was staying in to get a sponsor in Alcoholics Anonymous. And after the meeting, I decided I would go up and I would ask this guy to be my sponsor. And I went up to him and I choked, and I couldn't ask him. And instead, I said to him, I said, how'd you stay sober 10 years? And he looked at me right now and he says, I didn't drink. Now, up until that moment, I kind of liked that guy. But you see, you know what it felt like? I felt like he was making fun of me. Because the real thing that was going on inside is that I was secretly aware of something that scared the hell out of me. And what I was aware of is that I didn't have what it takes to not drink. See, I had tried it. There were times the last few years where with all the sincerity inside me, I would get dried out in a hospital or a detox, and I would say to myself, I'm not going to drink anymore. I'm going to get a job. I'm going to become a citizen. I'm going to make it up to my family. I'm going to make things right. I'm going to turn over a new leaf. And you know something? And I meant that. But I didn't have the power to do that. And you know, when he said to me, he says, I asked him how he stayed sober 10 years. He says, I didn't drink. I thought it was like he was making fun of me. I felt like he was pointing out what was really wrong with me. And you know something? It never occurred to me that it's true that I don't have what it takes not to drink, but it never occurred to me that you didn't either. It never occurred to me. See, I thought it seemed like you guys just stopped drinking and got happy. You looked like you stopped drinking comfortably. And you come to meetings and you hear people that get up at the podium and they say things like, yeah, two years ago I was selling blood and my wife had thrown me out and I lost my job. I was unemployable and I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, put the plug in the jug, and I'm president of the corporation, and my wife took me back, and my kid's a doctor today, and on and on. It's like, and you ask people in AA, you take a chance once in a while, and you come up to them, you tell them all your problems, and they say things to you. Well, God will take care of all that stuff. It's like, sure He will. It's, him and the tooth fairy. So, my dilemma in coming here was that I was starting to become painfully aware that I didn't have what it takes to not drink, and yet you appeared to me to have what it takes to not drink. And it never occurred to me you found it here. And I eventually went out and drank again, and that was the August of 1978 was I started my last drunk, living in the park on the north side of Pittsburgh. And a couple things happened to me on my last drunk that changed my life. And one of them was that I was living in this park, and every day I would go up to this place that I'd been thrown out of. And I would hang around outside, and I'd wait for the guys that were in this program to come out on their way to do laundry or on their way to work. And I would bum quarters and nickels and dimes off them so I could get a jug of wine. And there was one day when I was real sick, and I was up there, and I'd had these clothes on, for a long time without bathing, and I'd messed myself, and I felt embarrassed and humiliated, but so sick that I needed to drink. And I'm standing up there, and a guy comes out that was kind of like my partner when I was in this place. And me and him, we used to go to meetings and sit in the back, in our throne of contempt and kind of talk to each other, and we'd come up with what's really wrong with the speakers, and that kind of thing, and how screwed up they are, and etc. And I asked him for some money, and he looked at me like he felt sorry for me, and he gave me a couple dollars. And I felt so humiliated. I went and I got myself a bottle of Wild Irish Rose, and I went back to the park, and I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden, all the humiliation and degradation and the things I felt guilty for over the last couple years started coming to the surface, and I was drinking, and I'm just kind of sinking into oblivion, and I know that I'm going to pass out soon and come to and be sick again and need another bottle. And I was real tired. And I didn't want to go on anymore. And I was trying to think of a way I could kill myself that wouldn't be too painful. And preferably where I could look noble, maybe throw myself in front of a bus saving an old lady and 30 orphans or something like that. I was sat there and I really wanted to die, and I thought of different ways. I thought if I could just get 100 sleeping pills, or if I wasn't such a wimp, if I could just get up the courage to go down and jump off that bridge, or if I could just get the courage to run out in front of a truck. And I felt like such a failure. And all of a sudden, the thoughts started coming into my head from when I was a little kid and I was in Catholic school, and some of the things the nuns told us about God and death and hell and all that stuff. And the thought goes through my mind that if I die and there's a God, I'm going to probably go to hell. And it was like, I remember sitting there and cursing God and saying, if there's a God, go blank yourself. What are you going to do to me that's any worse than it? Have at it. If I can die and get to the other side, do your best. Give me your best shot. What are you going to do to me that's any worse than this? And that was a very important turning point in my life. You see, at that point, all of a sudden, I could stop proving to myself over and over again that there wasn't God. There wasn't a God. I didn't have to defend it. There was a song that came out years ago called Bobby McGee, and in the song there was a line said, freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose. And that's where I was at. Like, it didn't matter anymore. I don't care if there's a God. I don't care if there isn't a God. It just doesn't matter. I just want out of this, and suicide looked like a good deal. And I could never get it together to kill myself. Not because I didn't want to. I was just too terrified to even do that. And I felt like a failure. And about 10 days later, through a bizarre series of coincidences, I ended up in a drying out place in Las Vegas, Nevada. And something had broken inside of me. And I thought it was over. I thought it was over. I was in this drying out joint, and I didn't think I could possibly stay sober. I thought I'm going to probably get out of here, and when I can't take it anymore, and I end up drunk again, maybe I'll have the guts then to kill myself. And the reason I didn't think I could stay sober is because I felt broken inside. See, there were other times in recovery programs, and there were other times when I tried to turn over a new leaf where I would be all pumped up, and I'd be motivated, and I'd have positive thinking, and I know what my problem is. I just don't take the first drink, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do that. And it was like this time, all my get up and go got up and went. And there was like nothing in here. I mean, nothing. And I didn't understand that what had happened to me is that I'd surrendered to this disease. What it felt like to me was I felt like it was the end of the rope. It didn't feel like a good spot to be in. I felt totally hopeless, and yet all the fight inside me was gone. And some things had changed. This time, when people in Alcoholics Anonymous would come by and they'd say, they'd tell me things like, why don't you come to this meeting with us? I'd just say, okay. All right. And when they told me to get a sponsor, I just said, sure. Okay. They said to go to at least one meeting every day. I just said, all right. They said, even if you don't believe in God, try to get down on your knees every morning and ask Him to help you to stay sober for that day. And before you go to bed at night, thank Him. I just said, all right. And I just started doing whatever they told me to do, without question. And it was like I wasn't fighting anything. And I didn't think it would work. I felt empty, like a useless empty shell. I thought, this thing can't work. I don't have the positive thinking. I don't have the motivation. I'm not going to be able to do this. And I just started following directions. And, all the other times that I ever tried to straighten out my life, what would happen is I would get to a point that was kind of like a bottom. At least it looked like a bottom from the outside. And I would grab hold of my condition and I would say, okay, I'm going to recover. I'm going to turn this around. I'll do anything to stay sober that seems reasonable to me. Now, the problem with that is I'm using my mind to figure out what's good for me. I would be better off getting direction from Charles Manson than trying to figure out what's good for me in my own head. Honestly, if I were to make a list of all the things I thought were going to be good for me and then the results, right? And if I made a list of all the things I thought were going to be terrible, like coming to Alcoholics Anonymous, quitting drinking, finding God, and what happened as a result of those, it becomes real clear that I don't know what's good for me. I never did. And yet I would approach this thing with my keen intellectual mind. I'm going to pick and choose. And if you're new and you're sitting here and you're kind of looking around Alcoholics Anonymous, maybe going to a couple meetings, and you're trying to figure out your personal plan for recovery, drink. Get it over with. Don't put yourself through this shit, man. Just drink. Get it over with. Come back broken and get a sponsor and just do this thing. And if you're sitting here and maybe you're sober a month or a week or 6 months and you're kind of hanging around the fringes of Alcoholics Anonymous, and maybe a month from now, maybe 6 months from now, you're sitting in a bar somewhere and you run into one of your old drinking partners. And he says to you, how come you're drinking? I thought you went to that A&A. Doesn't it work? Do yourself a favor and do us a favor. Tell him the truth. Tell him, I don't really know if it works or not. All I did was go to a couple stupid meetings. I never really bought this whole package. And the reason I say that is that I've never seen anyone drink again who bought the whole package. I've seen the people like myself and people that I sponsor drink over and over and over again because we buy our portion of it. And what happened to me coming off my last drunk was that I got beaten to a point where I was willing to buy this whole package. And everything. I lived my life on a big yes to Alcoholics Anonymous. And I still try to do that. I try to do whatever Alcoholics Anonymous asks me to do. There was a guy up here before the meeting gave a pitch for people that are needed in service. And, I see a lot of people in AA selectively shut themselves off from certain parts of this program. They'll say, well, I'll pray and I'll go to the meetings, but the service part's politics. Or I'll do service, but I don't want to work with newcomers. Or I'll go to meetings and work with newcomers and get into service, but I don't buy this God thing. Now, people like us, with the track records that we have, and with our luck, really, if we're going to leave out a part, we're probably going to leave out the wrong part. I mean, it's not like we get here through a series of brilliant decisions, you know? And I got to a point where I was just willing to buy this whole package. And I just said, yeah. And a lot of things started to change. And you know, I didn't feel like I fit in Alcoholics Anonymous for a long, long time. And one of the things that happened to me that really changed things around for me was I was in a meeting one night, and there was a gal there who was secretary of this meeting. And she started asking me to help her with the chairs and the ashtrays and everything. And, you know, I felt so less than that it was like I was excited about being able to help. And I really wanted to. And I started helping. And next thing I know, she's at the meeting one night and she says, my term as secretary is over. I nominate Bob. All in favor, say aye. And next thing I know, I'm standing there with all this literature, right? And I'm the secretary of this meeting. And I don't want to be the secretary of this meeting. First of all, it's inconvenient. And it cut into my thinking time. But I was afraid to say no, so I just said okay. And I started coming to the meetings early, and I decided, my ego kind of got into this, and I decided this was going to be the best meeting in the world. And I would arrange the literature in patterns that would boggle the newcomers on the table. I got the best donuts you can find anywhere. I started welcoming people at the door if somebody was there and they were raising their hands. Now, I'm only a few months sober. I'm going up there and I'm trying to make them feel welcome. And all of a sudden, I started feeling something. I started feeling two things I'd never felt before. Never felt them sober. And one was that I felt like I belonged somewhere. I really felt like I fit at that meeting. And the other thing that I felt is the feeling that I've found in Alcoholics Anonymous that's become more important to me than happiness, more important than anything. And as I started to develop a feeling of usefulness, and I can't put into words what that has done for how I feel about myself as a person inside. I had things backwards all my life. You know, I always felt less than. I always felt like I wasn't enough, like I wasn't good enough, like I didn't fit. And I tried to compensate for that by big grandiose ego things. You know, and you know what? I ended up coming here, like a lot of us come here, we're like those Hollywood sets down at Universal Studios. You know, it looks like a beautiful mansion from the outside, and you walk around back and there's nothing there. It's all smoke. It's all facade. And I didn't understand that I was an egomaniac with an inferiority complex. And that's not so much that I felt like a piece of whale shit. I felt like a very special piece of whale shit. And I've been driven by this all my life to try to make up for it and to pump up all this phony crap out here, thinking that if you tell me I'm wonderful, maybe I'll feel like it. If you act like you accept me, maybe I'll feel like I'm acceptable. And it never worked. And what I've come to understand and come to discover is that in Alcoholics Anonymous is that it's absolutely impossible to treat an inside disease with outside stuff. It's absolutely impossible. And I've tried that all my life. And the demoralization I felt as a result of the thousands of failures at that, all have to do with who and what I am inside. And what happened to me in Alcoholics Anonymous is that people here pushed me lovingly. And I'll tell you something, there are some master lovers in Alcoholics Anonymous. There are people who know how to love you when you can't stand them. There are people here that know how to love you when you can't stand to be loved. And the master lovers of Alcoholics Anonymous have pushed me to take some actions that have kept my ego small and at the same time helped me to build some self-esteem by being useful and reaching out to others. And I belong to a home group that's a big book study group, and I'm very proud to be a member. And I was pushed into that book when I was brand new in sobriety. And if you're new, I encourage you to get that book, and I encourage you to study it, because I'm going to let you in on a secret. All alcoholics are carriers. Some days we carry the message, and some days we carry the disease. And if you don't read that book, you ain't going to know who's carrying what. And you know something? Some days I carry the message, and some days I'm full of the disease. And that's just the way it is. The message is in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I think, I feel like sometimes like I'm a dying breed. Myself and a few people were the last of the big book thumpers in our neighborhood. And because I don't think there's any other way to go. There's movements in Alcoholics Anonymous that come in here from treatment centers that say some things that I think are bizarre. Things like, well, if you're uncomfortable, get into your feelings. Now, I can see you tried that. I don't know about anybody else, but the last thing I want to get into is me. You know, I got the kind of mind that I can be feeling fine, everything's okay, and then you'll ask me, "How you doing?" And I'll say, "Fine," and then I'll think about it, and I'll think, you know, I do kind of feel a little funny. I'm not real sure what it is, but something's really wrong here, you know? And it's like 5-10 minutes later of just getting into me, and it's like, I just might as well drink. You know, what we have here is we have a 180-degree turn. And that the problem is always me, and the answer is always you. And I went through life, and the problem was always you, and the answer was always me. And I ended up in Alcoholics Anonymous. And what I've discovered here is that through a process that I was fortunate enough to plug myself into in these 12 steps, I've opened myself up to be a channel. And, you know, I don't know about anybody else, but the most, you know, that feeling that I've always looked for, that I found in alcohol in the early days when it really worked, that feeling of unity, that feeling like I fit or being external, like of being enough, I found that in Alcoholics Anonymous, in being of service to others. Everything I found here is the opposite of whatever has always made sense to me. You know, I was a victim, like it talks about in chapter 5, I was a victim of the illusion that I could wrest satisfaction and happiness out of this world if I just manage well. I mean, if I just get my life in order, if I just get my ducks lined up in a row, not only will I feel like you look, I'll feel better than you look. And you know something? The more I tried to make myself happy, the more miserable I've become. And I've done that in sobriety. You know, this is a disease of self-obsession. It's a disease of self-centeredness. And the only cure I've found around here is in you. I don't understand people who find a connection with God and go off and be a hermit. I don't know about anybody else, but all of a sudden me and God would be doing so good that we'd have a little light wine. All right? And I've seen it happen hundreds of times in Alcoholics Anonymous. So people come in here and they just get so spiritual that they've kind of risen above the fellowship of AA, and the next thing you know, they're raising their hand in a meeting as a newcomer. And I've seen it happen to people with 25, 30, 15, 5 years. Doesn't make any difference. See, this goddamn disease just never goes away. And I have this alcoholism today just as much as it was when I was drinking wine, living in a park. And if you're new, there's good news and there's bad news. And the good news is that what we have here is a process that really is an effective treatment for the dis-ease and isolation of alcoholism. What Alcoholics Anonymous has done for me is everything that alcohol ever did. But the bad news is that it doesn't work as fast as 5 shots of tequila. And I don't know about anybody else, but patience has never been one of my long suits. I think the only reason I'm here is that I had no other place to go, and I was beaten enough to just say yes to this package. And if you're new and you're here, you're probably willing to go to any lengths to be in this sweat box on a Saturday night in a town where your head's probably already, just since the beginning of the meeting, told you 30 or 40 things that would be a lot more exciting than being here. But if you come here and you do what we do, you'll find a way to go. And you know something? You probably already know this, but if you keep doing what you've been doing, you'll keep getting what you've been getting. And if you're new, I suggest you get a sponsor, and I suggest you get into that book. There's a lot of ways to work the 12 steps, and some of them will make you sicker, and some of them will make you recover. And I believe in that big book. I've seen, it took me 5 years to finally do a 4th step the way it's said in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I didn't get what it said in there until I did it the way it says in there. I've seen 4-step guides that are kind of, I don't know who sits and thinks them up. I mean, there's like 500 questions, like, have you ever had sex with a Shetland pony? Did it remind you of your father? Just bizarre stuff, right? And what I found in the 4th step in Alcoholics Anonymous is not a way to get more into me. It's a change of attitude. It's a change of attitude. When they trick you into making a list of everybody who had ever screwed you in your whole life, and then you do what it says in the book on the next page, and all of a sudden you realize that you owe them an amends. Right? And what you realize is that they were just like you are. One of the great things that has happened here is that I'm no longer a victim. And I'll tell you something, by the time I got here, it was like life's a bitch and then you die. Man, everybody in this world was screwed up. Life was unfair. And you know something? There's only ever been one person on this face of the earth that's ever come between me and any good thing God has ever given to any of his children. And that's been me. There's only one person that could possibly have hurt me and my loved ones. There's no one on the face of the earth that could have hurt me and my loved ones the way I did. The sad thing about that is all that wreckage was done on good intention. I never sat down in a bar over a drink and plotted a way to ruin my life for somebody that cared about me. I never did. And yet, if you look at my life, it's a series of things like that. And it all because I was running the show. And if you're new I'm going to close. If you're new, I hope you stick around here. I mean, what do you got to lose? I mean, it's probably not, it's not like you come here and your dance card's full, you know, and the phone's ringing off the wall and you got people, places to go and people to see. I think most of us come here because we're stuck. We come here because we're at the end of our rope. And if we had one better idea, we'd try it. And that's all I got. Thank you.